Colin Heywood works at the Maritime Historical Studies Centre, where I work at the University of Hull. He is unwell, unfit to travel, and deeply disappointed that he can't be here to deliver his paper himself. He sends his very best wishes to the conference as a whole and to his many friends and colleagues of long standing who are here today. Colin moved back to Hull in about 2000, I think it was, having had a long and distinguished career at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London, with stints in the United States of America at Chicago, amongst other places as well. He's a renowned Ottomanist, and in recent times he has turned his hand to researching and publishing what he calls micro-historical studies of voyages and seafarers in the Mediterranean, mainly English voyages, ships and seafarers, in the context of the so-called northern invasion of that sea by the English, the Dutch, etc. in the late 16th and early 17th century. And this paper fits into that context. Colin starts, any study of corsairing, piracy, privateering in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Aegean in the early modern era must invoke both the unities and disunities of the subject. In terms of unity, maritime commerce raiding, whatever form it took, and however ideologically nuanced, possessed a single unitary base, that of purposeful economic activity, the capitalism of the poor and the dispossessed. And he draws upon the work of Michel Fontenay, C.R. Pennell, and somebody called David Starkey in making that opening point. Economics and warfare intertwine and overlap. In the last decade of the 17th century, piracy and corsairing were carried on in the waters of the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean in the context of two wars, the Veneto-Ottoman War of the Sacra Lega and the Anglo-Dutch conflict with France. In this period, the waters of the southern Aegean, in a sense which mimics the contemporary Caribbean, were beyond the line, being both Ottoman and non-Ottoman, as well as not non-Ottoman. I'll read that again. Ottoman and not Ottoman, as well as not non-Ottoman. The chaos and anarchy which dominated the Aegean and most of the islands in that sea during the years of the Veneto-Ottoman Wars, from the mid-17th to the early 18th century, challenged the utility of sequential or factographic narrative forms. So how do we progress? How do we get inside this subject? Well, Colin suggests we adopt the techniques of microhistory. Microhistory will allow us to go beyond the grand narratives of Brodel's great work, despite the incontrovertible, if depressing, fact that the general revolution in post-1968 historiography and writing history from below seems to have largely passed the Mediterranean by. Colin suggests that we should use microhistory to go beyond and recalibrate the northern invasion phase of the Brodelian Mediterranean meta-narrative. And there he's quoting Josh White's work, and he also refers at this point to the work of Michael Talbot as well. Personal and individual maritime narratives suitable for this purpose are thin on the ground. For the Aegean in the last 15 years of the 17th century has only generated, according to Ben Slott, 4 individual maritime narratives. Colin himself is working on a 5th, the narrative of John Looker, who was an officer aboard the Blackham galley in a work that's still in progress. And the fourth of Slott's narratives is that of Mr. Roberts, the so-called Mr. Roberts, who was serving aboard His Majesty's hired ship Arcana, which capsized in the harbour of Neo, that's Eos, on the 12th of June 1692. And that's the focus of the paper, and it's the narrative and under the undetermined identity of Mr. Roberts which forms the subject of the paper. So the paper focuses on Mr. Roberts. Who was he? What can he tell us about the Mediterranean or the Aegean in this period of conflict at the end of the 17th century? The author was, according to the literature as we know it, a seaman in the English Navy. In 1692, according to his own testimony, he was serving aboard HMS Arcana, which is described, as it says on the screen, as one of His Majesty's hired ships. The vessel capsized while careening in the harbour of Eos in 1692. 3 days after the capsize, Roberts was taken aboard a crucial or corsair and placed into captivity by 12 rogues, as he calls them, who appeared out of the rocks and forced him aboard the vessel. And that forms the basis of the narrative. Now, this work is not unknown. It's been used by Slott, Michel Fontenay, and D.A. Zakithinas. Slott describes Roberts as an ancien corsair and a liar, in words to that effect anyway. Fontenay is rather more positive and correctly, according to Colin, as we'll find out, positions Roberts as a shipwrecked mariner who was impressed aboard a corsair vessel until he was enabled to make his escape. And we're testing out the accuracy of these views, and I can tell you now that Colin's very much on the side of Michel Fontenay. Now, Eos is there on the map. That is not the Arcana galley in the left-hand corner there. And Eos was one of the islands of the Cyclades. Its harbour, a magnificent natural anchorage, was the island's sole asset. And that, together with the island's relative remoteness, far from the main routes of the Aegean commerce, meant that the island served principally as a pirate lair at this point in time. A refuge which was both out of the Ottomans' way and at the same time strategically situated as a base from which raids could be launched against Turkish shipping passing by Rhodes. By the end of the 17th century, seafarers and pirates, drawn by the attractions of the port and its harbour, had begun to settle there and rapidly became assimilated through intermarriage into the local population. Now, we haven't really got time to examine Robert's account in detail of his servitude aboard the Crucelle, the St. Helena it was called. But we can look at the Arcana galley, a vessel which did exist. And to do this, we need to consult the records of the National Archives. That's, of course, the British National Archives. Now, the Arcana galley was in fact a privateer, a private ship of war, a specialist type of private ship of war. And Colin's looked at HCA 26-1, and there the Arcana galley, the declaration made by her commander John Murray is contained there. She was 247 tons with 26 carriage guns and 160 men. Now, in relative terms, in the context of British privateering at that stage, these are the characteristics of a high-cost, high-risk risk expedition. This vessel is similar in dimensions to William Dampier's Success and the Speedwell, both of which set off for the Pacific in 1694, and one of which circumnavigated. The Blackham Galley, as I've mentioned, Colin's working on, was of similar dimensions. These are large-scale private ships of war set out with particular missions. And the Charles is another vessel set out at this stage of similar dimensions, and the Charles ended up in Corunna. There was a mutiny aboard, and John Every took the Charles, renamed it the Fancy, and took it into the Indian Ocean and committed acts of piracy there. So it fits into that high-risk branch of the privateering business. Also in the National Archives, in Chancery Master's exhibits, Colin has unearthed an assignment of Sir Stephen Evans about the expedition, and that's the word that's used, expedition, of the Arcana Galley to capture French ships. And there is also a letter in State Papers 105-109 from Ali Bassa, or Ali Pasha as it should be, about a vessel taken by Captain Murray, commander of the Arcana. So we can situate the Arcana Galley in the records of this period. Now, so far so good. The records back up the important elements of Mr. Roberts' narrative as we know it today. We can look at the chronology of the voyage here. 12th of June 1692, the vessel capsizes. Roberts, 3 days later, is pressed aboard this Cruzal, the St. Helena. He escapes to Smyrna. 1693 is aboard a Phoenician vessel, etc., etc. And then he gets passage from Livorno to Izmir and witnesses the siege of Chios. From late 1694 through to the early days of 1696, he used the Levant voyages from Livorno with the English and the Dutch. And then there comes a significant point when he is pressed aboard HMS Gloucester at Smyrna on the 7th of April 1696. He then serves aboard this naval vessel and arrives back in England and is transferred to the Mary and the Weymouth. Now the point about this is these are royal vessels, so they generated accounts, so we have evidence, and the captain's log and the pay book of the Gloucester are available again in the National Archives in Admiralty papers, and from this we can actually identify Mr. Roberts, who's actually a midshipman in the end, and his name is Anthony Roberts. So the crucial date is the 7th of April 1696, when he joined the Gloucester. He was on escort duty in Smyrna Bay. The captain was Thomas Poulton, and in the captain's log and the pay book, Mr. Roberts is named as Anthony Roberts from Smyrna, entered as a midshipman to be discharged along with the rest of the crew on the 12th of May 1697. A few days later, he moves with Captain Poulton and the rest of the crew to the Mary, and then is turned over to the Weymouth, where he serves for little more than a month before being discharged. We lose track of him thereafter until he's finally paid off on the 17th of March 1700. We don't know whether he was promoted from the rank of midshipman or what he did during those 3 years of service in the Royal Navy. The trail goes cold. There's another piece of information, and Colin castigates himself for missing this, because in the Bodleian Library, a document which Colin has long known about but dismissed as being irrelevant, in fact turns out to be another edition, another version of the voyage account, published in 1700, and this gives more information or more confirmation that Roberts's Christian name was Anthony. Now, the other aspect of this recently uncovered document is that it's dedicated to Sir John St. Auban of Clowens, who was the second Baronet St. Auban, and he was MP for Helston in Cornwall during the 1690s. And this gives another clue in this detective story, because that's taken Colin down to Cornwall to have a look at the records there to see if there's any trace of an Anthony Roberts in the parish where his dedicatee was based. And sure enough, there is an Anthony Roberts who was born in that parish and was about 20 years old by the time that Anthony Roberts, as we know him, was engaged in the Gloucester as a midshipman. So there is a further track opening up there. We're being speculative here perhaps, but Colin intends to pursue this further. So just to sum up, how reliable a witness was Roberts? Well, by his own account, he had an inquiring mind. He made his captivity bearable by studying languages. He learnt Turkish, Greek and Italian while he was under captivity. And his manner of living was such that he always took great notice when he had the opportunity of the isles, ports, roads and soundings. And this is rather similar to William Dampier, his contemporary in the Caribbean and the South Seas, to Basil Ringrose, another contemporary who came home from the Pacific shores of the Americas with the so-called Wagoner, drawings of the ports and islands that he visited. So Roberts appears to be of that ilk. His testimony is corroborated by other sources, the sources that Colin has listed over the last few minutes. And as far as Colin is concerned, although we've only got part way through this story, Anthony Roberts, with his linguistic skills, his literary abilities, and his power of vivid description, as well as his eventful life in the waters of the Aegean, remains what might be called an exceptional typical amongst the midshipmen of the Navy of William III and the privateersmen of the 1690s. And he's therefore a fitting subject for further micro-historical investigation. Thank you very much.